For the first time in years, Arsenal no longer look like a beautiful project that still needs time. They look ready. Ready to dominate England, ready to conquer Europe, ready to finally complete the transformation Mikel Arteta started when this club was broken, fragile, and drifting further away from the elite. The Emirates now feels different. There is fear in the atmosphere again. Opponents no longer come to London believing they can survive. They come hoping they can escape. Declan Rice has turned the midfield into a battlefield. Saliba and Gabriel defend like men who enjoy destroying attacks before they even begin. Saka has become the face of a generation. And across Europe, people have quietly started asking the same dangerous question: is this finally Arsenal's era? But while Arsenal were building the perfect machine, something terrifying was beginning to grow in Paris. Not another glamorous PSG side obsessed with superstar marketing. Something far more unpredictable, far more violent. Because Ousmane Dembélé had suddenly become impossible to control, and alongside him, Kvaratskhelia was turning chaos into an art form. Together, they weren't just destroying defenders, they were destroying structure itself, and that might be the one thing Arsenal cannot survive. What makes this Arsenal side so dangerous is not just their talent. It is the feeling that they finally understand who they are. For years, Arsenal looked like a team constantly searching for an identity, too soft in big moments, too emotional under pressure, too inexperienced to survive the brutality of elite football. But slowly, almost painfully, Arteta changed that culture piece by piece. He turned a chaotic squad into one of the most disciplined systems in Europe. Every movement now feels calculated. Every press feels coordinated. Every player looks connected to a bigger idea. This is no longer the Arsenal that collapses the moment things become uncomfortable. Declan Rice brought authority into the midfield. Saliba transformed the defense into something cold and intimidating. Martin Ødegaard became the brain controlling the rhythm of entire matches. And Bukayo Saka stopped looking like a talented young player and started looking like a future football icon. Across England, teams began adjusting their entire game plans just to survive Arsenal's pressure. And in Europe, many clubs quietly realized something even worse. Arsenal were still getting better. That was the terrifying part. Because most great teams eventually peak and begin to decline. Arsenal looked like a side that had not even reached their final form yet. The Emirates started dreaming about Champions League nights again. Fans spoke about dynasties, about eras, about finally returning to the top of European football after decades of frustration. But while Arsenal were becoming the most complete team in England, attention across Europe slowly began shifting toward Paris. Because over there, something much more unstable was evolving. Something that did not care about control, structure, or balance. And that made it dangerous in a completely different way. For years, Ousmane Dembélé was treated like one of football's greatest frustrations. Every coach saw the talent. Every defender feared the speed. But nobody could fully control the chaos that came with him. Injuries destroyed his rhythm. Inconsistency damaged his reputation. At Barcelona, there were moments where he looked capable of becoming the most dangerous winger in the world, only to disappear again weeks later. Eventually, many people stopped believing he would ever truly fulfill his potential, and that was exactly when he became terrifying. Because for the first time in his career, Dembélé stopped playing like a player trying to prove himself. Under Luis Enrique, he started playing with freedom, confidence, cruelty. He no longer looked rushed when isolated against defenders. He looked calm, almost amused. Fullbacks stopped knowing which direction he would attack. Defensive structures stopped making sense against him. One second he was standing still. The next second the entire backline was collapsing into panic. And the most frightening thing of all was that he finally looked healthy enough to sustain it. But even Dembélé was not the most unpredictable force inside this new PSG side. That title may belong to Kvaratskhelia. There is something deeply uncomfortable about defending against Kvaratskhelia because he never attacks space the way most wingers do. He attacks confidence. He dribbles like someone trying to mentally break defenders before physically beating them. One movement freezes you. The next movement humiliates you. And unlike many flair players, he seems to become colder the bigger the occasion gets. Champions League pressure does not scare him. It sharpens him. Suddenly, PSG no longer looked like a team built around superstar names and glamorous football. They looked unstable, violent in transition, impossible to predict. And across Europe, coaches slowly started realizing a terrifying possibility. Maybe the most dangerous team in Europe was no longer the one controlling games. Maybe it was the one capable of destroying control completely. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable for Arsenal fans, because on paper, Arsenal may actually be the more complete team. They defend better as a unit. Their midfield is more balanced. Their structure is cleaner. Their pressing is more organized. Over 90 minutes, Arteta's system can suffocate almost anyone in Europe. But football at the highest level is rarely decided only by structure, especially in the Champions League, especially in knockout football. Sometimes, it is decided by who can survive chaos. And chaos may be the one environment Arsenal still secretly struggle against. Arteta built this team around control. Control of possession, control of space, control of tempo. Arsenal want matches to happen on their terms. They want opponents trapped inside patterns they can predict and dominate. That is why they look almost unbeatable when the game stays organized. But players like Dembélé and Kvaratskhelia do not follow football logic the way most elite wingers do. They destroy rhythm before defenses can even adjust to it. The dangerous part is how perfectly they target the few risks Arsenal still carry. Arsenal's fullbacks push high to support attacks. Their defensive line often stays aggressive near midfield. Saliba and Gabriel are exceptional defenders when protecting structure, but PSG's transition game is designed specifically to break structure apart. One failed press, one misplaced pass, 1 second of hesitation. Suddenly, Dembele is sprinting into open grass with defenders running backward in panic. Suddenly, Kvaratskhelia is isolated 1 versus 1, with space to manipulate bodies and minds. And that changes everything. Because Arsenal were built to dominate modern football through organization and control. The problem is that Dembele and Kvaratskhelia represent the exact opposite philosophy. They are not trying to control the game. They are trying to make the game collapse into madness. And sometimes, that is even more dangerous. The frightening thing for Arsenal is that the warning signs were already there long before anyone started talking about PSG. Even during some of their biggest victories, there were moments where the system looked vulnerable once matches became emotionally unstable. Fast transitions caused problems. Direct wingers caused panic. And when opponents managed to bypass Arsenal's first wave of pressure, the game suddenly became far more uncomfortable than Arteta wanted it to be. That is the hidden risk of building such an aggressive structure. The higher you push forward, the more brutal the punishment becomes when control disappears. And in the Champions League, control disappears all the time. That is why some Arsenal fans still carry a quiet fear despite how incredible this team has become. They remember the moments where big European nights turned chaotic too quickly. They remember matches where Arsenal dominated possession but still looked strangely exposed every time opponents attacked in open space. Against normal teams, Arsenal usually recover before the damage becomes fatal. Against players like Dembele and Kvaratskhelia, recovery may not even be possible, because neither of them need many chances. Dembele only needs one isolated sprint to turn an organized defense into confusion. Kvaratskhelia only needs one defender losing confidence before the entire momentum of a match changes. And the deeper PSG moved into Europe, the more terrifying that combination started to feel. This was no longer a glamorous PSG side trying to entertain people. This version looked ruthless, more direct, more emotionally aggressive, almost like they enjoyed dragging elite teams into uncomfortable situations. And suddenly, Arsenal's greatest strength started looking dangerously close to becoming a weakness. And that is why this story feels bigger than just a tactical matchup. Because Arsenal are no longer fighting to prove they belong among Europe's elite. That stage is over. Nobody looks at them as inexperienced outsiders anymore. Nobody sees them as a young project still searching for identity. This team is now expected to win, expected to dominate, expected to finally bring Arsenal back to the top of European football for the first time in generations. And expectations change everything. The higher a team rises, the heavier every Champions League night becomes. Suddenly, every mistake feels historic. Every elimination feels catastrophic. Arteta did not spend years rebuilding Arsenal just to become another strong Premier League side remembered for almost moments. He wants a dynasty, He wants this era to be remembered alongside the greatest teams Europe has ever seen. But PSG are chasing something just as desperate. For years, they tried to buy greatness through superstar names and glamorous marketing. It failed over and over again. But this new version feels different, more dangerous emotionally, more unpredictable tactically. Dembélé is no longer playing to escape criticism. He is playing like someone finally aware of how unstoppable he can become. And Kvaratskhelia looks like the kind of player capable of turning a single Champions League moment into football mythology. That is what makes this collision terrifying, because only one narrative can survive. Either Arsenal finally prove that structure, discipline, and control are enough to rule modern football, or PSG prove that chaos, speed, and emotional violence are still the most dangerous weapons in the sport. And the deeper both clubs move toward each other in Europe, the more it starts feeling inevitable that football is heading toward one defining night that could change the future of both projects forever. And maybe that is exactly why the possibility of Arsenal facing PSG in the Champions League feels so dangerous. Because it has all the ingredients of the kind of night football never forgets. Imagine the atmosphere at the Emirates, the stadium shaking before kickoff, Arsenal controlling possession early, moving the ball with confidence, forcing PSG deeper and deeper into their own half. Everything looking exactly the way Arteta planned it. Rice winning duels, Ødegaard dictating tempo, Saka stretching the defense. The crowd beginning to believe they are watching Arsenal take another step toward European greatness. And then, suddenly, the game changes. One misplaced pass in midfield, one failed press, 1 second where Arsenal's structure opens slightly wider than normal. That is all it takes. Dembélé receives the ball near the halfway line and accelerates before anyone can react. The entire rhythm of the match collapses instantly. Defenders stop stepping forward and start retreating in panic. Arsenal's carefully organized shape turns into pure survival mode within seconds. And before the stadium can even process what is happening, Kvaratskhelia appears in the empty space. That is the terrifying part about players like them. They do not just create chances, they create emotional shock. One moment, a team feels completely in control. The next moment, fear spreads everywhere. Suddenly, the crowd becomes quieter. Passes become heavier. Decisions become rushed. The match no longer feels stable. And Arsenal know this feeling, because the Champions League has punished many great teams exactly this way before. Teams that looked tactically superior. Teams that looked more complete. Teams that believed they could control every detail, until one chaotic moment destroyed the emotional balance of the entire night. And against this version of PSG, Arsenal may be facing the most dangerous chaos football has produced in years. Right now, Arsenal are still one of the best teams in the world. In many ways, they represent what modern football has been evolving toward for years. Organized pressing, positional control, technical intelligence, physical dominance. Arteta built a system capable of suffocating opponents slowly until matches begin to feel impossible to escape from. And that is exactly why so many people believe Arsenal are destined to win the Champions League sooner rather than later. But football is changing again. Across Europe, more and more elite teams are starting to realize that structure alone is no longer enough in knockout football. The game has become faster, more emotional, more unstable. One transition can erase 90 minutes of tactical superiority. One unpredictable player can completely distort an entire defensive plan. And maybe no team represents that evolution more dangerously than this PSG side, because they no longer play like a luxury project obsessed with image and glamour. They play like predators. Dembele and Kvaratskhelia have transformed the emotional identity of the team. They attack constantly. They force defenders into panic. They make matches feel chaotic even when PSG are not dominating possession. And the scariest part is that they seem to thrive when games become psychologically unstable. That is why this possible collision with Arsenal feels so fascinating. It is not just a battle between two elite clubs. It feels like a battle between two different visions of modern football itself. One built around control, the other built around destruction. And Europe may soon discover which philosophy is truly stronger when everything is on the line. Maybe that is what makes modern football so terrifying now. The closer a team gets to perfection, the more vulnerable they become to chaos. For years, Arsenal dreamed about reaching this level again. A team feared across Europe, a team capable of controlling matches against almost anyone. And finally, after all the rebuilding, all the failures, and all the painful seasons, they look ready. Ready to create a new era. Ready to stand at the top of European football once more. But football never stays predictable for long. Because just as Arsenal perfected control, Europe produced two players designed to destroy it. Dembélé and Kvaratskhelia do not care about rhythm. They do not care about stability. They turn matches into emotional warfare. And sometimes, that is exactly what decides the Champions League. Maybe Arsenal really are the future of European football. Maybe Arteta's system will eventually overpower everyone standing in front of it. But history has shown something brutal again and again. Some teams lose because they are weaker. Others lose because football suddenly becomes too chaotic to control. And if Arsenal ever meet this version of PSG under the lights of the Champions League, they may discover the difference the hardest way possible. So what do you think? If Arsenal face PSG in the Champions League, who survives the pressure? Does Arteta's structure finally prove too powerful for Europe? Or are Dembélé and Kvaratskhelia the kind of chaos no system can truly stop? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic football stories.